Hi, on behalf of myself, Jed Norwood, Forex Strategy Secrets, and the Global Stealth Network, I want to welcome you to this presentation. We have multiple countries here attending today, and we're excited about that. We've got, it spans from Asia, Europe, the U.S., specifically we have Spain, the U.K., we have Singapore, quite a few. I'm pretty pleased with this. I'm excited. And so we're glad you're here. The message we have today is one that we want you to be able to share with everyone. And so this is a live event, but we are going to be, it is being recorded right now, and we will get this out to everybody. A link that you can share with your family and friends, church groups, organizations, clubs, whatever. We want this to get out. We feel this is important that people understand. Okay, so let's get started. Globally, we are at a crossroads. And what I mean by that is we are no longer a set of countries that commingle occasionally. Our economies and our governments are commingled. And I say that because with a global economy, it brings all kinds of different types of nuances and ways of doing business. Thanks to the internet and a lot of other technologies, that's made it possible for us to even host this meeting today. And so we're really excited about that. But the thing that concerns me is that it puts the control seat for each country into a different realm that we're not used to. And I want to talk about this. First of all, we live in a bubble economy. And that's one of the things I'm really concerned about when we talk about global economies, is that it's not just a matter of, okay, Russia's economy struggling, everybody else is doing okay, or so the U.S. is doing fine, Canada's doing fine, or Europe's doing fine, or let's say China is doing fine, but let's say Japan, for example, is having a problem, and everybody else just goes about business as usual while Japan works out their problems. Well, that's not the way it is anymore. Because we live in a bubble economy. Now let's explain what a bubble is. A bubble economy is an economy that is overinflated, superinflated, hyperinflated, whatever we're going to call it, into existence. And the way that's done is through a fiat system. We're going to talk about fiat currency here in a minute. But when you pump false money into an economy, inflate it, then it becomes unsustainable. And it's not just one country that has this bubble economy problem. Every country has this bubble economy problem. But the thing that is most frightening is that all of our bubbles, because we commingle in our business and our affairs, and our currencies are so tapped together, and everything is happening on a digital level now. We're connected. We share debt. We buy and sell debt from each other every day. It's a big issue. And so the fallacy about this is if a bubble pops, you can never reinflate that bubble without altering it altogether into something totally different. So if one of our country's bubbles pops, every country feels it. And because that bubble cannot be reinflated, the other bubbles take strain and they pop too. What if multiple bubbles pop all at once? Then we really feel some devastating effects. So you need to understand that is the whole reason why it is such a crazy place right now. Now let's talk about fiat money. Fiat currency is currency that is printed and not backed by gold. Without a gold standard, money doesn't have true value. It doesn't have intrinsic value. And so what you get is inflation and deflation. And let me explain what I mean by this. Biblically, if we look at Joseph, who was sold into Egypt by his brothers as a slave, 2,000 years BC, roughly, he was sold for the price of a slave of the age of 20 or under 20, somewhere about there. And the reason we know that is because if you look at the way they broke out that and explain that, he was sold for 20 pieces of silver. That is how much a 20-year-old or a teenage young slave, male slave, was sold for. A woman was also sold for 20 pieces of silver. But an adult male was sold for 30. There's a key factor here I want you to understand. Silver and gold have always had a 16-to-1 ratio. Okay, and there's a couple of reasons why it has that ratio, and we'll talk about those in a minute. Historically, they hold true to that, except in economies that are created around fiat. Then there is inflation. It's not connected with the silver and gold prices, and so they fluctuate. It throws things off. The important thing to remember here is, if we go back to Joseph, 2,000 years prior to Christ being born, and then we jump all the way to that period and find out how much Christ was sold for. As an adult male, he was sold for 30 pieces of silver. There was not much inflation there, was there, in that 2,000-year period? That is the importance of a standard backed by gold. Now, when you have controlled, all this money, this fiat money is controlled by central banks, then it puts the power seat into almost a nebulous kind of a formation where you're not sure who the powers are that are in control of things. But it definitely does not allow countries to have their freedoms or their sovereignties. Okay, so that's a concern. We're going to talk about that. But what would the objective be for this kind of a scenario? Well, there's talk of a one world government. And this objective is frightening to me, and it should be to you, because we're going to talk about governments here and how they work. And you tell me at the end of this discussion what it is that would be the objective or the reason for a one world government to be brought into existence. Because it's such a big concern, I want to explain it, so let's get right down to it right now. There are 5 forms of government: a monarchy, an oligarchy, a democracy, a republic, and an anarchy. Or are there? Let's break these down one at a time. A monarchy is a group of people that put one of their members as a figurehead or up forefront as the appeared leader. This is seen in kingdoms, dictatorships, but the problem is they're still governed by a member of people, or a body of people. These members of this body would be a king's nobleman or a dictator's bureaucrats. Okay, these are just some examples. So really, there isn't just one person in charge. It is a group, which then turns it into an oligarchy. We're going to talk about that next. So what that does is that eliminates monarchy from being a stable form of government. Now, an oligarchy is ruled by a group, an elite group, a small group. Unfortunately, that puts a lot of power in a small percentage of the people's hands on the globe. Most nations are controlled by a powerful few, and this is the most common form of government we see historically and in existence today. Historically, it's proven that an oligarchy is a stable form of government. Now, democracy. This is where majority rules. Okay, the people rule. They make the decisions. Okay, the flaw in this form of government is that the majority is not restrained, and they can choose to take away things like an individual's home, his or her business, or even someone's children. If the majority is uneducated on any issue whatsoever, it can bring about some unwanted, harsh, and damaging results. And the problem with this is that in order to educate the majority in a democracy and have a standard across the board, it's really hard, because pockets of individuals can create their own agendas. And this becomes very dangerous, very, very unstable. And ultimately what happens with a democracy is that it also ends up going into an oligarchy as well. So democracy's out. Now we're going to skip and jump over to anarchy. Anarchy is the existence of no government. At least it starts out that way. It's caused by several different things. First, it's created by crisis or force, a conflict that's created to affect a change. The people that are under power don't like what's happening, and so they revolt. Or power-hungry people decide they want to alter things, or there's a breakup of different power forces fighting against each other to see who's going to come out on top. This is how anarchy is developed. Okay. The problem with this is that people cannot be productive. They have to protect themselves, and so production and progression in that company or that country starts to fall and fail. Well, as the citizens become tired of the crisis and running out of things and shortages happening because production isn't happening, they grow tired of this and they run to the source of the conflict, which is typically this group of people who decided to create the problem in the first place, and ask them to fix it. Well, they can. They just stop doing what they're doing. They take control. And typically that means that that small group of people become an oligarchy. So an anarchy is not a stable form of government either. So now let's jump back up to a republic. Let's talk about a republic. A republic is the law. This is a set of rules that govern everyone with equity, even the government that's in charge. It protects its citizens from each other, outside governments, and from itself. Now let's take Greece for example. The city-states of Greece, back many years ago, many years ago, developed some really wild forms of democracy, okay, which ended up creating, after they fell apart and there was a lot of fighting and things going on, turned into an oligarchy. And we're going to talk about that here in a minute. Solon came in and said, hey, in order for us to have a stable form of government where people can actually be productive and there can be good things happening in our country, we have to have a fixed body of law. And so he created these laws, and it formed a very sound Greece. But who actually did better than Greece was Rome. They took Solon's theories and they created a 12 tables of Roman law. Now Rome became one of the highest, most powerful empires in history because of these laws. The thing is that in a republic, with these laws, the government leaves the people alone to be productive, to govern themselves. That creates prosperity. A republic is a form of government that recognizes that when the government grows, the people's freedoms recede. So let's talk about Greece's city-states. What happened was, back when they had their democracies, the elected officials used government controls to take from one person and give to another. They did this through agricultural subsidies, housing and welfare programs, rising taxes, and controls over the private sector. The results were pretty harsh. First, you had production and quality diminished in the production of goods and services for the people. Shortages then became prevalent and were created. Empty hands searching for government bailouts became a problem. Mobs formed demanding needs from the government because the bailouts weren't working. Freedom was exchanged for security, which led to an oligarchy with a progression of the Caesars. So in essence, what we end up with, as far as stable forms of government, is an oligarchy or a republic. Now let's talk about economics and how this plays into everything. First of all, we need to set a foundation for what capital is, because there's some controversy as to what capital really is. But let's use this measuring stick for this example. You do your research and you find out if it holds true or not. Capital is the measure of production. Okay, so what is production? Well, it's tools, machinery, people, any resource that allows you to be able to expend energy to produce something of greater value or of greater need. So let me ask you this. Which economies are capitalistic then? So if we're talking about capital systems, you would think that, for example, let's say the United States is a capital-based system. Well, what about a communistic country? Good question. Think about it. If you have capital, and capital is tools, machinery, and people, don't all countries operate with tools, machinery, and people? And don't all countries consider all three of those things an asset to them? If that's the case, then every economy in the globe is capital-based. So let's break this down and look at, for example, the communistic systems versus the free market systems. The only difference between the two is the ownership. Okay, so we're going to talk about this because we're dealing with different types of economies here. We'll break this down so you can see the results. In a communistic economy, it's very monopolistic and it's state controlled. In a free market economy, you have competition, free enterprise, where everyone is free to self-regulate, to transact with one another. And I want to point out here with the free market system that the only time the government gets in control or gets involved in a true free market economy is when force, fraud, or damage occurs, and they step in to make sure that the victim gets vindicated and that the perpetrator gets punished. That's it. In a monopolistic situation, the ownership is private and state-owned, but the state is in control, or at least those who are in control of the state. In a competitive environment, it's privately owned and controlled privately as well. The results of each of these are monopolistic economies result in high prices and low quality, because if there's no competition, why try to improve? In a competitive economy, the results are honesty, thrifty, hardworking producers create lower prices and higher quality prevail. Competition in excellence is their main objective. Now, throughout the world, if you look at people who are seeking for the best scenario, a free enterprise system is preferred globally. So there are 4 types of government-controlled economies. Let's talk about them one by one. First, we have fascism, the most efficient of the state-controlled economies. A government does not have title to the businesses, but regulates the business owners. How to produce, what to produce, where to produce, when to produce, where to buy raw materials, who to hire, who to fire, and they get to set the costs. The business owner feels that they own their business, but they take care of the, maintaining equipment, personnel, public relations, advertising, things like that. But in reality, they're not in charge because they're regulated. They're regulated to a point that they can't even advance very far. There's a cap. Okay, Nazism, National Socialism is the key here to think about. The government takes ownership of certain industries and regulates all others. Now, socialism. This one's a little frightening for me because this is one step away from communism. But what happens here is it creates a very strange dynamic. The government owns the major industry sectors such as transportation, communications, and utilities, which leverages control over the other industries. With the vital sectors owned, and regulatory agencies gain control over everything else no matter what you try to do. Very subtle. Communism is the most honest of all the controlled economies. The government owns everything without pretense. Don't argue. Now, we've talked about the political side of things. We've talked about the economic side of things. Now we need to talk about the morality factor. In Proverbs 14:34, it talks about righteousness exalteth a nation. And John Adams said of the U.S. Constitution, our Constitution was made only for a moral and righteous people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of another. There are people across the globe today that believe liberty is license and morality is unimportant or irrelevant to politics or economics. The problem with this is that personal agendas get in the way of the common law. That creates a problem. Because if you can't look at your political views or your economic status and or behaviors with a moral guidance, then you are a risk to yourself and society. Benjamin Franklin said, only a virtuous people are capable of freedom. As nations become corrupt and vicious, they have more need for masters. I'd like to share with you my philosophy and what I'm trying to accomplish here and what I'm hoping that you will grasp onto and want to share with others. I'm calling for a season of prayer and fasting. But I want to share with you 3 examples of how this needs to be enacted by all of us today in our respective countries. Let's first talk about Elijah from the Bible. He faced boldly King Ahab and Queen Jezebel for the moral revision of the kingdom. They had altered what was supposed to be set and what was bringing prosperity and perverted it. And it caused serious downfalls, problems inside the communities themselves. And it tore the kingdom down. And Elijah warned him of this. Daniel was a hostage of Babylon. He had been hand-selected to be a personal protege of the king Nebuchadnezzar. Now he gave counsel to the king on the king's dreams. The king sought him out because of the spiritual abilities he had and was able to get moral direction. The kingdom prospered. Then, when King Darius took position, he also ruled under him, and King Darius made Daniel a ruler. Well, this made his fellow priests jealous, and so they devised a trap to remove prayer from the state, and tricked Darius into creating an environment where everyone had to pray a national prayer to him, and anyone caught praying to any other god would be put to death. Well, you know the rest of the story. This was all because of prayer, people. Today, in countries all around the world, and especially here in the U.S., being a concern for those of us who live here, prayer is under attack. Pastors are being under attack. There's propaganda going out right now to try to scare pastors and ministers into silencing any discussion of politics or prayer or bringing morality into the public workplace. They're silencing the words of men of God. This is wrong. This is the same thing that Daniel faced. Now, with Elijah and Daniel, I ask you, where would you stand if you were in their shoes? Because you are already in their shoes. Now let's talk about Esther. Sweet, sweet Esther. She was also a descendant of Jewish exiles, just like Daniel. She ends up winning a beauty contest, and she's crowned queen by King Xerxes. Now her cousin Mordecai learns of a plot to kill all Jews in the kingdom, and how Xerxes was tricked into understanding how this was supposed to be a good thing by, again, the oligarchy group underneath him. Mordecai asks her to intervene with the king on behalf of the Jews to expose her religion to him in peril of her own life, because if you remember, she was not supposed to approach the king. No one was, whether you're his wife or not. That was penalty of death if you did, without being summoned by him first. She knew this was the case, but she said to Mordecai, I will do this, even at the peril of my own life. And then she asks Mordecai to ask the people to fast and pray for her. And she was successful, and she fulfilled what she was supposed to do. Here's my plea to you. I believe that because of human nature, we always need a beginning and an end date. We do better that way. Now, I believe that even though we have an ending date on this particular request, I think that this should be an ongoing thing, but at least this gives us something to work for in a unified, specified amount of time. I urge everybody to continue further if they so choose to follow this invitation. But, starting from today, until December 31st, 2012, I urge you to pray daily and have a fast for all nations and their leaders, for inspiration to see the right way to govern, for all religious leaders of all faiths, for courage to preach the truth from their stations, and for all moral and godly people of all faiths to have courage and strength to uphold those truths. So back to our original question. A one-world government, is it good or not? What problems would it cause? Well, I hope that you can see that with the two forms of governments that are stable, an oligarchy would lead us to a state-owned control of all of our liberties, including our morality. Now, republics or free marketplaces allows us as separate nations to thrive. So the forces that would affect change for a single governing system do not empower those seeking this type of a system. So we are in peril right now. The only one world government that would work would be the one that would be ran by the King of Kings himself. But until then, we need to remember our allegiance to him in faith and seek his help through these difficult times ahead. Thank you for attending today. I hope this was worth your time, that you felt the urgency of this message, and that you're willing to share it with others. Please, send this link out to as many people as you know. Spread the word. and it does not have to stay within your own country. Send it to everybody and anybody, because this is a global crossroads. Thank you for coming, and God bless.